All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another self-isolation episode here. We're live with Nick Groves tonight. Nick, how you doing?
Good, Chris. How are you? How's everyone else?
Pretty good,
Hopefully
pretty good.
good.
Can't complain. Yeah, got a few viewers already. Awesome. Cool. This is gonna be fun. This is gonna be
Great.
a good look ahead to what hopefully will be a good trout season. Only a couple months away now. Getting pretty close.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone's got the calendars out and they're starting to put X's on the days we are officially approaching. I can hear when I take the dogs out in the morning, I can hear the familiar spring birds chirping. I don't know why they're here in this weather right now, but it is coming. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I'll bring it up. All right, cool. Right on. So, what are we tying tonight? What do you have going on for us?
well, in the spirit of praying for spring and trout season to come, I think I thought, well, in my true fashion and form, where I thought we'd do some streamers. As most people that know me or see me online or through Drift, I'm usually a streamer guy. That's what I love to do. It's the most exciting part of the sport for me is to try and target any kind of species of fish on the fly with bigger imitations, targeting larger fish. Going for that trophy and sacrificing the numbers is kind of my game. And I mean, I started out fishing the Grand when I was a little kid, and went through all phases. But I think with everything, you kind of find your niche, and you find what really keeps you motivated and excited to, for me tying and fishing especially. It's the bigger stuff. Love to do it. It's never. I've never got bored of it. And yeah, it's kind of where I'm at. Not to say that I don't love a good dry fly hatch in the evenings on the Grand, or a good first light morning nymph session with my buddies. But generally speaking, with fly fishing right now, from muskie down to trout and bass and everything else, it's sort of a streamer game for me. So that's what I like to do. And why not tie some streamers that have been fun for me to tie lately and that have been working on the.
Wicked, very good. So that kind of answers a little bit about what my next question was going to be. But for those of our viewers who don't know, who are you? Why are you here?
Just kind of lost your sound there,
Yeah.
Chris.
You have me or no?
Can you hear me?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's just kind of quiet there.
A little quiet. Interesting. I'll try and speak up. Any better?
There you are. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
little better now.
All right. Cool. So yeah, what I was gonna ask is, who are you for those who don't know, and why are you here, and what's your background?
So my background is, my name is Nick Groves, and I've known you, Chris, and Rob for quite a while, since probably sometime just before the shop opened up in Toronto. I've been around the Grand River, born and raised in Fergus. Started fishing through fly fishing, actually, self-taught when I was, I think, around 13. Still riding my bike down to the river every day. It was either that or skateboarding, and in the summers. And back then was sort of the early days of the initiatives by Friends of the Grand to start creating a brown trout fishery in through Fergus and Elora. So, getting started fishing around, things were a lot different back then, but I started to learn through Ken Collins, worked at Trout Fitter's shop for a while on weekends as a young kid, and really was just super into bugs, collecting insects, tying them, imitating them, learning, everything I could about the entomology of insects is kind of, it even overshadowed fishing to some extent, to the point that I started my university career in aquatic entomology. It just was a passion of mine, and I found myself a lot of times on the river collecting insects and taking them home, and trying to learn that game was sort of part of my passion. Then kind of university hit, and I kind of took a step back from fishing for a number of years, and was a classic 20 to 27-year-old student, and came back to it. I never went too far from Fergus and Elora, though, and the river was always there for me, and it's been a big part of my life, since I was a kid. really got back into it, I guess, probably about 7, 8 years ago is when I really, things started to really pick up for me in the fishing world. That was around the time when I met Rob Heel and the guys at the Wilson shop in Fergus, and started to really get back into the steelhead season, extending my fly fishing game, getting really interested back in tying again. And that's kind of when the streamer thing evolved for me, learning steelhead and learning about swinging flies and learning about bigger imitations. And, it was the first time I actually even saw a streamer was I was out with Steve May, who showed me a yellow heifer groomer and told me how to fish it and what it did. And I couldn't even believe it. We threw that thing out there and I could not present it as erratically and crazy as Steve wanted it. It was just like mind blowing. And, that those guys were around fishing streamers on the Grand long before we came along. And it's, a lot of the Michigan guys that even some of the flies we're tying tonight are influenced heavily on some of those guys that used to come over to the Grand and fish the drake hatches, the hex hatches, and definitely streamer fish, before my time. So that's kind of where I got started on the Grand, and the fish on the Grand are very specific. I find very exciting to target streamer fishing. There's sort of so many micro ecosystems, I guess you can call it, on the 25K of tailwater that we have, that it keeps things really interesting. There's so many different types of water to target, and that just means that there's so many different presentations that you have to kind of learn, and so many different nuances of this river and how to present a bigger fly to make them eat, that it's years of being close to the water and being on it to try and learn some kind of behavioral pattern to these fish. And at the end of the day and at the end of each year, we kind of look back and we say, what, it didn't match last year. This year was completely different than 2 years ago. How come these colors and this fly worked in 2018? We got pictures to prove it, but this year it didn't do anything. That's kind of our river. I don't find there's a lot of consistency there. The only thing that you can be consistent on is putting in the time and staying confident in your game, and eventually you'll figure it out. I find bite windows, streamer fishing for browns on the Grand is very small. So you can get into like a half-hour glimmer of a bite window where you're actually hitting fish, and it's exciting. And then they can just be complete jerks in the next 10 minutes, and then they're just gone for a week or maybe even 2 weeks until you get into them again. So I think that's what keeps us going, fishing 3, 4, 5 days a week. You'd think we get a little bit tired of the water, but we're always, doing different things, and the fish just kind of keep us on our toes. They're very unpredictable, and they're very moody. So, and I think that's just it. And we're looking for that upper echelon fish. I mean, that's why we travel. My friend Jay and I, we travel to Arkansas every year, except this year. It's really painful to say, but we're sort of, our thing is, we're looking to weed out the big fish out of the pile and watch and learn how they eat, because it's pretty fun. So that's kind of where I'm at today. I've gotten into muskie fishing with my buddies Keith Blair and Walkerton and Jay King. We've really got into that over the last 3 seasons. Keith's been a muskie guy forever on the fly, so that's just kind of bringing me into this whole next level of extending my streamer season, targeting fish kind of the same way as we target browns. So yeah, it's kind of, right now for me, it's never a dull moment. We're always excited, always, creatively looking for something new at the vise that we're going to want to fish. And yeah, that's kind of what streamer fishing is to me. It just keeps me going.
Cool. That's awesome.
So yeah, that's me up to date from start to finish. Here I am.
Wicked. And these days you're a Renzetti tying ambassador as well, no?
Yeah,
Pretty
so
cool.
that was another kind of cool thing that happened to me just through the industry and through tying. I met and become good friends, or consider good friends, with a lot of the tyers that go down to Arkansas. So lots of relationships built down there. It's just really great. And with the Renzetti thing, it was pretty interesting. I'm a lefty, and I'm always pretty finicky on vices. And I've just, since I've moved around to a lot of different platforms, a lot of different vices, always tying streamers and wanting just that perfect feel. And I couldn't get it. I've been through a lot of things, great vices, amazing products, amazing designs, and it just, it wasn't for me. And it was actually through talking to Rob Sesta at Drift, and we got talking, and he was in touch with Renzetti and Lily, and it was kind of through that I got in touch with them, and they were at that time trying to build an ambassador program to drive, innovations, new products, new ideas that could kind of bring some life and some new different takes into their company. And anyway, so one thing led to another with that, and Lily ended up she had her first ambassadors weekend, and all the ambassadors were invited to come down to Florida. And it was essentially a weekend of like innovation, new products, new things we can develop, new ideas, key concepts, and then obviously a day of fishing out in Florida, which was fun. So it was a great weekend. There's such a tight family. Feels really good to be with that group, and it was the vice that kind of brought me there, though. As soon as I got into, and it was Russ Madden actually that was recommended and talking about the Clouser vice platform, and it was the one I ended up with, and the one that ultimately it was just like pure love at first sight. Everything about it was comfortable. I'm sure everyone that's been tying for a while, you have things that just don't feel right, and then you have a vice that no matter every time you walk by it, you just want to sit down and tie. That was it. So I was sold. And then you get into like the jaws are incredible. You can hold shanks, you can hold a 28 midge, or you can hold a 6/0 musky hook basically in the same jaw, which, there I am. I got one platform that does it all without trouble. And so huge proponent of that. Love the background of Renzetti, who they are, what they do. They're just such a great team of people, and I consider that they got some of the world's best designs and tools out there. And of course, the tie into that is our distribution products as well. The tying products that Lily's brought in to run that side of the business are, with all the brushes and synthetics that they offer, there's, pretty much anything you could ever imagine wanting to tie that you can do with synthetics, they have it. So, so it's just a great spot. It's a great place. I love being a part of it. And again, I'm also pro staff with Winston. That's been a fly rod that I've never been able to put down. So that's been a lot of years now. It's funny. It's been like 5 or 6 years. I was going through emails the other day, and I've been hooked up with Adam Hutchison at Winston for quite some time, and I have quite the pile of green tubes over to the left of me, and my wife, I don't think, has any idea of what I have. But Winston, again, I was down there to visit them actually on our honeymoon. Again, such a great, like, independent, tons of history, amazing product, great people to deal with, and I just kind of fell into place, started talking to those guys, and it worked out. So, overall, when I look at where I am in the kind of professional industry, I'm super happy right now with the stuff that the people and the things that I work with, and especially with you guys at Drift. I mean, I can't say that there's really a better independent brick and mortar fly shop out there, and any opportunity any of us get, we got to support the local guys. So, a little bit more about me.
That's awesome. Amazing. Cool. Well, let's see some of those great products. What are we tying tonight? Let's hop into it. I'm gonna throw you on full screen here, and I'll let you kind of run the show.
You want to start? Yep, sure. And again, if there's any questions, just shoot them at me. I can't see everyone else on this call, so I'm just gonna get going and tie. So I'm gonna take my pretty face off this camera. We're going to go back down to the vise, and we're going to start, we're going to go through 2 flies. I'll talk my way through it. Chris, you interrupt me if I'm talking too much or not saying the right thing, or you want to know something. How about that?
Yep. Yeah. And for folks watching, if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat here. and I'll fire them off to Nick, and he'll answer them for us.
Okay. So let's try that. If the light's too bright or too much of a wash, just let me know. I can adjust that. But basically, Chris, did you want to start with a sort of I guess a trickier fly? You want to start with something a little more simple? What's your take? Ramp up? Okay. A little bit simpler of a fly. This is one of my patterns. I can't tell. Let me just get this up here a little bit. How about that? So this is a fly I call it the Pokeroo, and it's essentially quite a simple platform, using a couple of RD's brushes, but we can talk about substitutes as we go through the fly. The key on this one is that it's been fishing for about 1.5 years now. I tie this up into like a 7.5 inch for the white for trout down south. And this thing has caught basically everything. Design is kind of based on a platform where I'm going to put weight on the bend of the front hook. So there's going to be some weight in there on the bend of the front hook. And then I'm creating some buoyancy in the head by creating sort of a canopy or a cover dome of, we're going to use some UV resin here. And what it does is it kind of traps air. It's super buoyant, but it's also got this weight on the back of the front hook that kind of completely counterbalances this thing with a super whippy tail, and it's just ridiculous. Bass are love it. I've lost a few of these to pike on the Grand, even in this size. And it's a super fun one to fish. It's highly visual. I mean, you can fish it on a sinking line. But you're definitely going to watch this thing come in. It basically instantly walks the dog for you. Here is a larger version. So this is a White River one. Had a couple great days on this, and it's just scaled up with a saddle tail and some ostrich curl on that one. So anyway, let's get started. Let's tie a fly. So the first hook I'm going to put in, I've got it's an Arex 605 number 2. You could easily substitute this hook for anything with like a 2XL shank. So I just like a bit of a shorter shank in the back hook because I just want a lot of good whipping, sort of walk the dog action. Thread, white Vivus power thread 140. Can you see that, Chris? I don't know if I'm too washed out there. Yeah. Right. Okay. Okay, well, Vivus 140 is basically the only thread I use anymore. I find it's got the perfect amount of stretch and the right amount of strength. The only time I'll change up is to a GSP, 150, for when I'm spinning deer or need something a little finer if I'm trying to hide thread in a wool head or something like that. So we're going to go ahead, and the other reason I like the Arex in the 605 is that it's got a perfect size hook gap in the back. So where you can fish 2 hooks, that gap on the back, it's a nice fine wire, but it's strong and deadly sharp.
And so that's the
we'll tie on
Trout Predator Light, right? That's the common name for that one.
The name for that one is Trout Predator Light. Yeah. So the tail on this, I played around with a bunch of different stuff, and I just found that the best action is straight up marabou. So just like a Kelly fly or most of Kelly's flies we're going to do, I'm just going to two-tone it. So I'm going to do an olive and a white stack with a bit of flash. Marabou still remains one of my favorite materials for streamers. You really can't beat the action. And it's that one material that's readily available. So I've got some olive and white.
Nice.
And they're the blood quills. Whatever you've got, you should be able to make it work for the tails. So I'm just going to take 1 feather of white, and the tails, aren't being palmered. So I mean, if you are trying to save or conserve the prime feathers in a bag, I mean, materials these days are not cheap. Marabou is a highly variable feather. Chris, you being in the spay world and some of the stuff that Incredible Flies Utah, you can probably attest to that, you know, where you can get away with a less quality feather on the back to save those palmering or collaring hackles for you know, the front or something a little more special. I'd go ahead and do it, but you want to make sure you get a good, nice, fluffy and you know, decent tail feathers. So I'm just going to select one olive feather, and usually on these tails, just because marabou will sort of, you know, the more you fish it and dry it and fish it and dry it, the more it's going to sort of start to break down.
Yep.
So to prep a marabou feather for this tail, I'm basically going to take the top, so the top piece of the stem, I'm going to pop it off because I don't like the stemmy stuff on top. I'm probably going to take and
spring, yeah. Your vise is like dead center here, so whatever works for you. Yeah.
So then I'm going to take, and I'm probably going to take off about 1/3 of the base just to where the stem starts to thin out. And what I'm looking to do is, as I preen these feathers up, I want all the tips to come together. If I use the more down the stem that I keep on there, the more it's going to clump. I want it to breathe and pulsate, right? So you don't, less is kind of more with marabou, similar to synthetics, but when the tips align, that's kind of where where you want this feather to be. There's other applications. If you're palmering, you can use more, obviously, but here we're just going to basically pop the top and strip it down so the feathers, all the tips of the feathers align. I want to keep this small. This one of them tines about 3.5 inches. It's not really that big, so it's kind of your prime bait fish size for you know, bass or imitative for trout. So I'm going to go about 1.5 shank in the length of this, and I'm just going to tie it in with a few turns. If you're really concerned about the taper, you can wrap that stem all the way up to the top. I'm not too concerned at this point, so I'm just going to trim it, lash it down, come back. I'm going to throw a couple strands of flash. You guys, the sky's the limit on colors on this. It's whatever you're confident in. Olive and white is a pretty predominant bait fish pattern, and I'm just going to be using any kind of flashaboo is going to do on your flash on the tail. I like this Mirage. You can use lateral scale that gives even a little bit more pop, but this is just like a pearl color. I'm going to just take 2 strands of that. And I'll tie it in on my side just a little bit longer than the tips of the marabou. Give it a couple turns. And then I'm going to fold it over onto the other side and wrap back. And then I just basically want that flash to be set on both sides of the feather, and then I'll trim it to the same length. And then I'm going to stack my olive feather on top. So I'm going to prep that the same way, where I'm going to basically pop the stem off the top. That one's already kind of gone. I'm going to strip off probably about the bottom 1/3. I'm left with a really nice plume there. I'm going to stack it. I want this just to be a little bit longer than the white, just to create that taper in the tail. So that's just, you know, coming a few mils or 1/8 of an inch past the white. I'm going to tie that in on top, lash back, and then I'll come just in front of where I tie down that white, trim that off, and then I'm going to come back. So here is where we're just going to do just like a woolly bugger. This is the exact same thing as a woolly bugger. So we are going to take some run-of-the-mill chenille.
Yep.
So that's just a woolly bugger chenille in a medium. That's readily available. It's simple. And when I do the palmering of the brush that I'm going to use, it gives a nice segmentation. So in this one, I want contrast between the olive and white. So I'm going to do olive on that. And when I first learned how to tie a woolly bugger, I think the thing goes is the last thing that you tie on is the first thing around.
Yeah.
So we're going to get our chenille ready. The only kind of funky material that I'm using on this is a couple brushes. One of them's just craft fur, but one of the brushes I use a lot for musky tying and a lot of palmering or giving a nice accent. It's called the Translucy brush from RD. A little goes a long way with them. Again, they come in two 12-inch lengths. This is the white in the 3-inch, and it's just a really cool because it's slightly opaque, and with the actual materials, it's a little more robust or stands out a little bit better than like a UV polar chenille. You can easily swap this out for a UV polar if you're not using the Translucy brush. It just means that you might want to bulk up a little bit more marabou as you're building the wings, but essentially I just like this for the contrast and the fact that it stands up. It gives a nice segmentation.
For sure.
So I'm going to take that and tie that in.
And so that was which side? That was a 1.5 inch.
Most of the RD brushes that I buy, you know, if you're belaying and tying game changers, you can get, you know, most of the brushes come in a 1, 2, and a 3-inch diameter width. I generally will go with a 3-inch because you can really go down a rabbit hole with brushes. If you want to get that game changer that you don't have to trim it all, but you want to tie it in 6 different colors, then you're basically buying 18 brushes to do 3 different colors of fly because you want the 1, 2, and the 3-inch. I usually buy brushes in a 3-inch. Unless I know specifically that it's just going to be for heads and I want a smaller head. But generally, I'm a 3-inch brush guy, and if I need to trim it, I will, and that's what we'll do here. With the polar chenille, if you're going to do this process with polar, it would be the same thing. I would just, if it's too long on the taper that I want, I'll just cut it and trim it. But this is going to be probably a little washed out to see, but it's a 3-inch. It's got some opaque white and then some pearl UV in it. These brushes are just beautiful. I've seen Blaine does a translucy changer in like a 12-inch, and it's just all this brush. The thing is insane looking.
Yeah.
Anyways, again, always use some different scissors than your good scissors for cutting these, but I'm just going to basically, I'll sometimes trim a little bit off the tip. I'm going to tie this on. And in the back, wrap it down. Just watch the tips of because it is a stainless metal brush, so it can break your thread. And then I'm going to take the chenille. Another little thing about chenille, rabbit, any of this stuff, brushes, I usually will not cut a piece and tie it in. Again, with materials and trying to preserve every last inch of what you're buying, I just leave it on, drop it down, and that way, like if I cut a 4-inch piece off and I'm tying a dozen flies, then over 12 flies I could be wasting an inch off each one. There's a foot of this material, so I usually won't cut anything that I'm palmering or using it for a wing or a back. So we will lash in that chenille right to the back, and then I'm going to come to the front. I will use a cradle on this. If you don't have a rotary vise or whatever, it's not the end of the world, but I do use my cradle quite a bit for just getting a nice uniform spin and palmer.
So if anyone's
and it's also,
sorry to cut you off there, Nick. If somebody's just bought a Renzetti and they haven't used rotary function and they haven't used cradle before, and they aren't aware of that little half hitch that you pulled on us there without mentioning it, how exactly, like, what are you considering here? Why are you doing that?
To set up for the rotary spin?
Yeah.
Okay. So I come to the front. So I'm going to be wrapping this chenille to the front. So when I get to once I get to the point that I want to be at, I'm going to do a half hitch. So if you have a whip finisher, just do a quick 1-2 turn whip finish, and that's going to keep the knot so that as the vise turns, the thread isn't wrapping around the hook and bulking up that head of that fly. Once it's out here on a half hitch, it's basically in line. So as you spin, you're not wrapping the thread around the hook. Otherwise, if you leave it hanging down and you don't have a cradle and you start spinning, you're gonna, before you tie off, you're gonna have to unwind that hook or that thread about 6 or 7 times, or however many wraps you do. So whip finisher or half hitch, I can't do the full head, Chris, just so you know. I can do one half hitch, but my little brain will not I know Kelly did a video on how to do that.
We actually just did
finish at the end. But whip finisher is fine, just to tie that off so it's secure.
Yeah.
Basically, when you're using the rotary function on any vise, you just want the bobbin cradle so that where the thread rests, it's relatively straight across. If it's too far up or too far down, it's just going to get all buggered up when you're spinning. So I usually keep it pretty close too, because the farther out you go, the more you're going to have to hand wind that bobbin back up to tie off. So I like to keep things nice and tight in there, so when I pull that off, I can instantly start to wrap. It's just a little trick and habit that saves a few seconds. So I basically done a half hitch. I got my chenille ready. This brush is a little bit on the long side, so it might get wrapped up. But anyway, and I'm just going to make sure that I would turn this the same way as I would wrap it. Okay, so that takes a bit to look at. But anyway, once you get started, nice firm pressure, 5 turns. That's perfectly uniform. It always seems intimidating or too time consuming to use the rotary function, but honestly, it gives you very consistent, uniform wraps when you're pommering or collaring every time. So then I just tie that off, sort of 2 turns in front, lift it back, 2 turns, that secures it and binds it in. Okay, and there's not much to this back half. All I wanted was the marabou tail for some kick and some tone, and I'm not putting anything else after this, so it's basically a woolly bugger. That's it. So to prep this brush, I'm just going to splay it out. It's sort of, the materials will go on either side, and I'm going to do another half hitch because I am gonna use the rotary on this.
Nice. And as you're doing that, Nick, maybe you could explain. We had a couple questions come in. One,
sure.
And this may not be a single answer, I know that you have, but what's your favorite streamer on the Upper Grand River?
My buddies will criticize me. The guys that I fish with a lot will criticize me all the time because I cannot just stay focused on one thing. And I'll get this a lot where I'll be like, hey, do you remember that last year when you, like, this fly that you were tying and fished worked all year long? And I will usually say, no, I can't remember it. I want to fish this one. My problem is because of fly tying that I can never just settle, or I tend not to remember what was working. Kelly's flies will have their moments on the Grand. I mean, they were designed for Michigan rivers. It's the same sort of latitude. It's kind of similar, other than we're in a tailwater, but the size, the profile, the way they're fished, a lot of them are heavier weight to get down in some of our deeper pools. And then some of his more swim bugs, like the heifer groomer, is definitely one of my favorites. Silk Kitty was my favorite for a few years. I tend to come back to those quite a bit. Last year for me, the heifer groomer was definitely one of my top. It's nice because you can fish it on a sinking line, but it will dig, but you're getting buoyancy, so you're not getting hung up on every cast on that Grand River algae or a big giant rock that's just going to break you off. But it is very effective because it's such an imitative sculpin, goby, whatever. It's great. So yeah, that I think, if I had one box or 6 flies to last me, it'd be probably 2 Kelly patterns. It'd probably be something like a kitty, and probably the heifer groomer. I haven't done, and a lot of people probably have proved me wrong, but I haven't done extremely well on dungeons on the Grand. but I've caught fish, but I find that it just something about that fly I haven't been dynamite on. It's more the kitties. You know, there's some other White River patterns that we've scaled down that work really well, but my go-to is going to be a heifer groomer. If I was going to pick my top, I wouldn't be fishing without that.
Cool. Right on.
Did you have another question there, Chris?
There was one. Yeah, I mean, you can sort of tie as you answer this, and we don't have to maybe dive super deep, but Patrick was wondering about sort of the general equipment that would be like your go-to setup. He's asking about just Southern Ontario in general. I know Patrick fishes the Grand and the Credit,
Yep.
but I imagine it's not too dissimilar. It's like, you know, weight of rod, line, leader. What's kind of your go-to?
Yep. Okay. I'll answer that. I'm just going to say this stuff. So what I want to do, I don't want to overlap this as I spin it. I want segmentation. So I'm going to palmer this up just like a woolly bugger. What'll happen is these fibers will start to hopefully taper back a little bit, but don't worry if it's unruly and sticking forward and stick it back. Once you get through it, you can then pull the fibers back, and as soon as you fish it, it'll do what you want. So I'm just going to make sure that I'm, you know, I'll pull it back here and there, but I'm just going to give it probably 4 turns to the front, and that's basically it. There you can see that there's a lot of material on there, and I'm just going to trim it a little bit, and then I'm going to pull that out. With the brushes, I just give it basically 2 turns over top, and then I'll secure it in front, and I will use like these ceramic kind of braid scissors or just something crappy to cut those brushes. And then, so that I just want to make sure it's all around the hook and it's got a nice segmentation. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to pull it all up just so I can trim it evenly. Leaving a few longer strands, whatever. I just want this thing to look kind of gnarly, and I just want to make sure it doesn't go over the back of the tail. So I'm going to just trim that off so that I'm starting to build a taper, so that this is just hitting the top third of the marabou tail. Chris, can you see that at all? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so you can see that's kind of tapered back, and with this brush, it's kind of cool because you can just see that on the paws, it's going to stand up, and then it's going to come down on the strip, and that's kind of just adding that action to the fly is pretty cool. And then that's it. Usually when I finish a head, sort of my technique is I'll just take some Zap-A-Gap, and I'll just hit it on the head before I whip finish, and then literally I got 4 turns, and that's all going to get secured in with the small drop of glue. So that's basically the back of this fly. So I will just go through, and if I don't like it, if it's a little too long, I'll just go through and give that a quick trim. You could probably do this fly with schleppen to get a nice webby segmentation, just like Sex Dungeon or whatever. You could try it with polar chenille, or you could use these brushes. It's basically, you know, if you wanted a more slender profile on this fly, you could easily use something else to palmer through. Equipment: 7 weight, 250 grain, full sinking 30-foot head, or a sinking tip in a line. Leader is nothing but 10-pound Maxima evergreen. That's streamer fishing. That's basically it. And the advantage of keeping it simple with that on any river system in Ontario for streamer fishing, for trout, bass, you know, it covers everything. You can fish a 7 weight basically for any kind of streamer application until you get into larger pike and muskie, I would say. Down in Arkansas, I might step up to an 8 to 10 weight, but we're fishing massive water and our flies are 8 inches, 7 inches, you know, bigger stuff, heavier lines. Do yourself a favor, if you want to focus on streamer fishing, you should, even on the Grand, have some sort of sinking tip line. I'll fish Kelly's airflow shovel head line on the Grand and do okay with it. There's a lot of deep pockets, a lot of deep pools, and depending on how you adjust your presentation and strip, you can fish a line like that. Just getting started, I mean, if you don't want to deal with a lot of bottom hangups and, you know, having that sinking line at your feet all the time, a super efficient way to do it would be to get something in like a 15-foot to 20-foot tip in whatever, like a sink 5 to sink 7. But usually, just to keep it simple, I go with the grain weight line. So 7 weights usually around a 250, 6 weights usually around a 200 grain. And I'm usually looking for something around a 30-foot sinking head with either a floating running line or an intermediate running line. Floating running lines are nicer on walking and wading situations because they float at your feet and they're not on the rocks, between your rocks and the feet on every step. And streamer fishing, you're always moving. It's very rare that you're going to stand in the same place for more than 5 minutes. So yeah, that's the equipment. As far as leader length, it's basically a loop on the end of your Maxima. If you wanted to get fancy, you could go with like a 25-pound Berkeley big game or something, just a heavier mono so you don't break your loop on the line. As easy, and you're going to do basically 18 inches of 25-pound, and then you're going to blood knot that down to your Maxima or whatever. But essentially, for the most part, I'm 3 feet a leader, and I'll chew up a foot of that before I put more Maxima on there. So I try to keep it 3 to 3.5 foot. That's really all I need. I haven't seen fish shy. Maybe you would want to switch to a longer leader, step it down, get a little fancier if you're trying a different streamer application, obviously. But what I'm doing is casting and stripping and putting immediate action to that fly. And I want that line to present the fly where I want it. So the longer the leader, the less impact that sinking tip has.
Awesome.
Okay, so that's the back half. That's basically a woolly bugger. There ain't much more to that. Okay, so then the front hook. I will get asked this question on the Grand single hooks, except if you're in specific areas. I will usually on most flies cut the back hook off. So I use 2 hooks because I could be fishing anywhere else. Could be fishing bass on the Saugeen. A lot of these flies that I tie carry over into multiple species. So I do tie, most of my flies are articulated. I tend to shy away from single hook flies just because I love that action. Most of the flies that I'm tying, I'm going to cut the back hook off if I have to apply it to a Grand River catch and release situation where it's single hooks only. I don't know, there might be a few where I look at the bug and I'm like looking at the river and I'll be like, no, I'm cutting the front hook off on this one, and then I'll probably kick myself. But you know, there's certain times where you just get that feeling that maybe they're going to be short striking, or maybe the way I'm going to fish this thing is going to be slow and they're going to pick it up off the bottom like an articulated crayfish or something, where that back hook as a stinger would be a little more effective. Most of the midsection to like faster action flies, though, those fish are moving to attack it. They're not just kind of treating it like a bug and inhaling it. So that would be my thing. Take the back hook off. Front hook's just a little bit longer of a shank. Usually I will either change the model or change the size to go 1 up just to get a longer shank, just to build that profile and taper. And also for most streamers, you're going to have some component of a head. So the back hook, you don't have a head. The front hook, you have a head. So we're going to go with something longer. This one here is the Ahrex TP615. It's the Trout Predator Streamer Long, which is a very similar hook to a more readily available hook that's been around for a while, the Mustad Deer Hair Stinger. Yep. This one doesn't match verbatim the Ahrex to the Deer Hair Stinger, but they're both essentially that kind of sweet spot. It's got an upturned back, super deadly sharp, easy hookups. I love the Mustads are basically what 99% of our streamers were ever tied on were those hooks. They're just deadly. So Ahrex has a very comparable, I think the Predator Strong or the PR320 is we've checked size for size and hook for hook. that is the deer hair stinger hook. This one, just as you get up in the sizes, you get a slightly longer shank. It's more like an Aberdeen, like a 3XL. Okay, so front hook, I'm going to start at the head. I'm going to wind this back, and we're going to connect the back hook to the front hook using beadle-on wire. Lots of people have lots of different ways to connect front to back. Lots of people swear by like a Berkeley big game mono or a big Maxima, like a 25, 30, 40 pound, even for musky stuff. I have always been a beadle-on guy, which is a wire from craft store. There's certain Rio products that'll work as well, but usually this is what I'm going for. So this, for any trout size stuff, I'm always using the 19 strands. So it's 19 strands of stainless wire braided in together. I run the 0.46 mil is what I use for most of my stuff. I used to use the 0.38, but it can just get a little weak over time. Unless I'm doing something like a mini sex dungeon or whatever, I'll step that down just to reduce bulk. So if you're buying connection wire, I recommend beadle-on 19 strand 0.46 mil will cover most of your streamer stuff. For trout, bass, or even pike aren't going to break that off. But certain people think that you can easily nick it or get a kink in it and then it doesn't swim right. Usually by that point my fly's toast anyway. So yeah. Chris, do you guys have anything in the shop that would be similar? I know there's some different bite wires or Rio products out there that would serve this function. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so can you hear me now? Okay, I lost your volume for a minute. So connecting the front to the back, I just know from the size of fly how long. You don't want to waste this, but you do have to cut a piece. So usually with a single or double bead on there, I'm going to use 3 inches of wire. So I'm going to cut, and I always have a trusty steel ruler, no matter where and when I'm tying, measuring proportions, measuring fly size, measuring wire length, any of that. I just always have it as a guide. Tons of different ways to do this. You'll see a lot of production tires that take the back, they'll thread it through and put the bead on and have a whole batch sitting there, and then they'll tie both pieces of wire in at once. I never really became a fan of that, because when I would tie it in, I would always get a bit of loop twist, so that when I held that fly and looked at it, the hook points were twisted. Drove me nuts. I couldn't handle it. So some people do it this way. This is what I do. So I always want to make sure I'm going to double the wire back on itself, but I always want to make sure that I'm going to start away from the head, because in any streamer, you always want to have a good amount of space to work with on the head. So I come back about 1/3 of the way down the shank. Okay, I'm going to take the one end and I'm going to tie it in with a little bit out the front. Okay, there's just a little bit out the front. And I'm going to just quickly lash that down as I'm holding the wire. I'm pulling it just back slightly towards me, so it's sitting on my side of the top of the shank. I'll come just to the bend. And it doesn't even need to be lashed down tightly at this point. I'm going to take a olive glass bead, again, a simple like craft store glass bead or whatever I think is the size generally. I'm just using this as a bit of a spacer. So I'm going to put that bead on. It is on there. I know you probably can't see it. I'm going to let it come down. I'm going to take the back fly, making sure the hook points down. And I'm going to take that end of the wire, put it through the bead, and then essentially I'm just going to hold it up and pull it tight so that I have about a bead width loop between the back hook eye and the bead. And right off the bat, as I pull that through, it's going to set up on the other side of where I lashed in the wire, on your side of the top of the hook shank. I'm just going to pinch that down when I'm happy with the length and give it 2 loose wraps and leave it. The advantage of doing it this way is that if you've got a twist in the wire now, with those 2 loose wraps, you can pick up that tag end and you can twist it in your fingers and make sure it's perfectly aligned. This one happened to sit in there perfectly, so I'm super happy with that. And again, it's just 2 loose wraps on this. I'm looking over top to make sure the wire is solid, and then I'll pull tight. Do some loose wraps just back to the tie-in point there, and I'll check it again. Now's your chance. If you don't like, if it's twisted, go back, take it off. Even with those 5 wraps, just like that, you probably could land a fish on that back hook, because there is a nylon coating on this wire. It's you know, a lot of people, you can glue it, you can do whatever to make sure it's secure. That's basically good. So I'm going to take this little tool or invention that's, again, one of the things that I worked on with Renzetti, which is the hook holder. I think we talked about this on a video a couple weeks back, Chris, so I won't belabor that. But basically, this is where you can prevent stabbing your hands, keeping your fly super in line and clean. So as you're tying, you can see exactly how this fly is going to look. It's called the hook holder. And it's just basically a collar. You can get it on the Traveler and basically every vise except the Master right now. So that holds everything out of the way, and then I can finish this up. So I'm going to wrap this forward on the top beside the other piece till I get to the point where I tie them both off, and then I'm going to take one tag end, fold it away from me, lash it down, one tag end towards me, pull it back, lash it down. So now I have the wire that's doubled over. Every 6 or 7 turns, I'll give it a snug pull, and I'll go up and down, creating sort of a cat's cradle kind of binding effect, you know. Up and down 3 times with a fold over. I don't think you're going to break that wire. You're going to bend the hook out before you pull that out, and that's been proven and tested. You won't break the Maxima though. That 10-pound Maxima, you'll pull a hook straight before you break that stuff off. That's why we use it. Okay, so basically now we're set up. We've got the back hook done. We just want to repeat some of the processes on the front hook until we get to the head. So what we're going to do first is, just like a traditional or a standard Kelly fly, we are going to create a collar, just a bit of a junction to cover the gap. Otherwise, you're basically going to be fishing 2 woolly buggers in tandem. Here we want to create a uniform body. So by putting a collar, a little bit of a collar or a cover of marabou on the back, it kind of bridges that gap between the front and the back and creates a nice uniform body, but doesn't affect the swim at all. So I'm using, this is a woolly bugger marabou, so readily available stuff. It's just a smaller feather. Sometimes they're actually off of, I believe, a turkey instead of a whatever bird. So yeah, anyway, just a bit of a shorter plume. So what I'll do is, to prep this feather and to do this junction, I'm going to take one of them, and just the way I do this is, again, I'll prep the feather so you can see that it's actually still the size of a blood quill, but it's just the actual length of the feather tips themselves are shorter. So I'm going to strip that off just so I know what I'm working with. And basically, to prep this, you could do it any way you want, but I usually take it from the top. I'll preen that down, and I'll take basically a piece of it, and I'll peel it off the one side of the stem. Okay, and then I'll fold it over onto the next piece, and I'll peel that off. Then I'll fold it onto the next piece, peel that off, and go all the way down that side of the stem until I'm done. And what that does is I've now collected everything off the one side of that feather without the stem, and it's all aligned and nice and neat. Okay, so you can trim the butt sections of that off. And again, you can use as much of this, you can go as long as you want, but I still want to see a bit of that. I don't want the marabou to overtake the whole back hook. So I'm just using this as a cover. So I'm basically going to want to be placing the tips only just past, about a third to half of the way down the back hook. And I'm going to tie this in on either side. So I'm on the side away from me right now, and I basically take that over the side, and I give it 2 or 3 wraps, and then I'll repeat the process on the other side. So, okay, again, I'm just taking a clump, folding it over, taking a clump, folding it over, taking a clump, folding it over, peeling off that other side. And what we're left with is a fully utilized plume of marabou. There's nothing left on there. I usually, if I was using the whole feather, I would have popped that tip off anyway. Okay, so I'm going to take that and I'm going to tie this on my side. And basically what that's going to do is create a full sort of 360 cover on that. I just want to make sure that I'm using sort of the same length on both sides to keep it nice and neat. Okay. So just a few turns there, and then I'm going to trim all the butt sections off. You can wrap, if you're interested in maintaining a taper as you go up, you could wrap that stuff forward, but I'm not getting that finicky because the head's going to sort of cover that up. Okay, so there's your cover. We've now got a nice tonality of white contrasting with olive. We're also going to do another olive wing and some more white. So essentially we got a white belly with an olive back. I'll just whip through this process quick here. So what we're going to do is just repeat that woolly bugger process where we're going to palmer up the chenille, palmer up the translucy brush, and we're going to come up. Oh, and I knew I was forgetting something. The whole purpose of this fly, ladies and gentlemen, is to put the weight.
Oh,
I knew I was going to miss something. The weight on the front hook. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll take this out of the vise and I'll just show you. I will still fish this fly, but basically if I take another hook, and usually when I'm tying these, I think the reason I forgot is because I will usually prep a bunch of these at once, but I'll take another front hook, and what I'll do is I'll put it in the vise on an angle like that. Okay. And this is what creates the biggest part of this whole fly is what creates most of the swim. So it fights with itself because I got this buoyant head and I got this heavy back keel, and it stalls the whole thing and it just makes it fight with itself. And it's a very, very cool, just a small 2-inch strip, and you're going to see it wiggle in the water and also kind of suspend because of the buoyancy of that UV. The way I weight it, so I'll put the hook in the vise on a bend like that. And then I'll just tie on, and I'll wrap my thread back to about the midpoint of the bend. Okay. And there's 2 different things you can do here. I've been using a lot of the tungsten scud weights. I'm not sure if you guys carry those.
I think we're actually working on bringing some in, but a pinch of edge and some lead wire would probably do the trick too.
So yeah, it's called a ribbed tungsten scud weight, and it's basically meant to tie like a Czech nymph. It's made out of tungsten. It looks like a caddis larva shell that's tapered. The things are absolutely perfect because they're slotted to go on the shank of the hook. You'll never see that on this camera, but basically for streamers and weight, they're incredible. So basically all I do is it fits perfectly because it also is curved to go on like a Gammarus hook or like a caddis hook. Right. And so the slot fits in perfect. So for a streamer tire that wants to keel something and wants an easy way to add a ton of weight, I've just lashed that 4 times. It's already like solid on there. It's like bang on. And so it's going to be on the bend so that when I tie my wire in to connect the back to the front, that's out of the way. And I will then lash it down, hit it with some Zap-A-Gap and lash it down, and it's never going anywhere. And then I will build the rest of the fly. So that's that. The alternative that would work equally as well is probably some .025 lead or non-toxic wire. Yep. That you would then do the same thing. So you tie on your thread, you would put about 10 turns of that wire on the bend, and then you would lash down and put some Zap or some glue on that, and that would give you kind of the same effect. But the whole point of this fly is to have it fight with itself. So on the strip, you're getting buoyancy in the front, suspension, and then you're getting this back that's like, whoa, slow down, and the whole thing just collapses. It's pretty cool action. So yeah, perfect that I completely forgot about that, Chris. I don't think anyone could have reminded me either. Anyway, that's that. So don't forget your weight. It's the whole point of this fly. But this one I will still fish depending if I'm fishing low water or shallow water. I just, if we're fishing smallmouth bass in the summer and this thing, I don't need that. I just want to fish something that's still going to move in the surface. This would work. And if I really wanted to, I could just take off what I did and put the weight on. So we'll put that back in the hook holder here, we'll tie back on, and we're essentially going to repeat the process with the chenille and translucent brush, but I'm going to leave about a third of the head. Okay, so I want to make sure that with the head brush that I'm going to do, I want about 5 or 6 turns to create the head. So basically, just gauge it. It'd be the same as if you're spinning a deer hair head. You kind of want to make sure you can get your deer in there. So translucent brush on, marabou up my nose, and prepping the chenille. I'll usually just pinch it and pull some of the fluff off the top so I can lash that down and reduce bulk. Okay, so there's that. I will come up to, so this is where I can do my half hitch or finish that off, and I'm leaving about, I would say a third of the shank there. So I'm going to hit that with a half hitch, put it in the cradle, and we'll lash that in. Again, we're at about 5, maybe 6 turns there. Tie that off. Okay, just make sure that's lashed down. And then I'll repeat the process with a half hitch, cradle up, palmer the translucent brush. So again, I'm going to prep it by pulling the fibers out so we don't trap them down. And then I'll start by giving it a little quarter turn wrap. And that's basically got that done.
So for anyone who hasn't worked with a dubbing brush before, you mind explaining just kind of what it is in case somebody's not familiar with the concept?
So it's essentially like a piece of chenille. So I mean, if you've tied a woolly bugger, it's just basically a bunch of material that's bound together on a string. I just got to grab my charging cable. Chris, give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Actually, half the people probably left when they saw I missed the weight on that front hook. Like, look at this guy. Game over. I'm out.
Isn't it your own fly too? This is your own pattern, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? It's like the only thing that really matters on this fly is that weight on the back of Ben. Yeah, and I forgot it. It's so perfect. Anyways, while we were going through that and getting back on, I trimmed off the brush. Looking at the length here, so we've got the exact same thing going on, but I do want to do a little bit of trimming here. I just wanted to kind of the tips of this brush to bleed into the back hook, kind of where the cover that we did ends. I'm just going to trim that. You saw I kind of cut it on an angle that gives me kind of a decent taper. Okay, now those fibers are going back again. I might go around and just trim them down a little bit randomly, just to give it a more tapered profile. That's basically it. And then the next step is to take 2 of your full-size marabou feathers again in olive, and I'm going to lay this over top as a back. If you're not happy with how much marabou you have there, feel free to go with 2 feathers. It all really depends on the feather because they're so highly different. So this one I usually will take 2 and take a look at them. So I'm going to prep it the same way though. I hate, especially with backs, I don't want that stem to kind of get twisted. So I'm going to pop the top off, and I'm going to strip off just enough so that I know that the tips are all going to align. And I'm going to prep that kind of the same way as I did for the tail. So as we come through here, all those tips are nicely aligned. And then I'm going to lay that flat kind of over top, and have a look at the length. So I just want the tips of that marabou feather to tie into the tail feather. Okay, just to create that overall back that's going to be olive and have a bit of taper. So I will lay that in. A few wraps on top. And if I wanted, here it's a little sparse. So I'll probably, what I would do is then I would take another feather and lay that down. Because, marabou will shrink up. So it's better to have a little more bulk right out of the box and fish it a bunch than have it turn to nothing after, you fished it for a few days or whatever. One of the other tips is always take the time. Usually, like if you have a spare, an empty box, if you're streamer fishing and rotating through patterns, as you can see, the stuff, it's not like tying a dozen hare's ear nips in 15 minutes, right? Like this is, a little bit more labor intensive. So why not take 5 minutes when you change your flies, put them on a patch or put them in a box so that as soon as you get back to the truck, usually I'm fishing at night, so it's usually cold anyway when we're done, throw them on the dash and dry them out on the defrost, or just make sure if you leave them in the box or you leave them crammed in your pocket, you're going to pull them out the next day and they're going to be garbage. The first time I fished with John McClure in Montana on my honeymoon again, it was the first time I met Kelly Gallup. Johnny picked me up in the dark, and we're in his truck and we're driving down the road. And as soon as the sun came up, all I could see was half of the dash up half the windshield was just full of fluff. Like all of his season's flies at the end of the day go up there and dry. And it was insane. Like there's probably 200 flies up there. So it's definitely something to take care of this stuff. Make sure you do. It's so much more worth it when you can pull that same fly that you caught 2 fish on and go catch 2 more on it. So I'm just going to lay another feather on top just to give that a little bit more bulk. I'll trim that off.
Nice. And to be clear, that's not the bugger marabou. That's your nice stuff that you're using over top.
That's the quills, yeah, the blood quills.
Yeah, nice. We did have one question while you were away from Scott. He was wondering if you had any opinions on color selection and how you're choosing colors. Are you matching forage, or do you have some kind of theory about light levels versus color, or are you looking for like bright colors that you can track in the water?
It's such a good question. It's probably the toughest question that you'll hear. I always go back to confidence. I think for a lot of different types of fishing, but specifically with streamer fishing, if your friend told you that yesterday he was out and there was a big bite on olive and yellow and conditions haven't changed, same temperature, same whatever, moon phase for all, and you go back and your least most confident fly, you've never caught a fish on olive and yellow. Am I going to go out and instantly put on olive and yellow because I was told it worked and catch a fish? Or am I going to fish my favorite color, which would be, let's say, black, and fish it harder, fish it with more confidence, cover more water with it before I decided it definitely wasn't going to work and change? But anyway, I think it's a confidence thing. So you're gonna gain your go-to colors, and the only person that can get on that is you. Like, I'll be fishing with Jay, who will have his specific color, and he will always start with that, and he will usually get it done with that, and that's his game. I will, on the same night, go with my game, which is like a golden tan, and I will focus on that, much, sometimes to our disadvantage. But you got to have confidence in the fly you're fishing, and you got to have confidence in the color you're fishing. So my color for next year will probably start with like black and olive. I'm feeling right now, but I mean, I've been tying flies this week that are like chartreuse white.
If you hold it back a bit, we'll be able to see it better. Yeah.
chartreuse white. I've got olive and like sculpin colors. You know, if you wanna learn about people that talk about figuring out the colors, you want to listen to Russ. Russ Madden will talk about. He just did an episode on for the Northern Angler in Michigan, and he's a match the bottom guy. So you can be fishing the same. You can be trying to imitate the same species of goby or crayfish or sculpin or whatever. But in Michigan, they got a lot of sand bottom. It might be a tan, orange, but the same species over here could be olive. So, you know, a lot of theory behind that is that matching the river bottom is a good place to start.
Yeah.
Same as collecting bugs. I mean, you're not going to fish a size 18 blue-winged olive when the drakes are on or whatever, right? Like you're looking for that imitative thing. If you go through a run and you see you're spooking crayfish all over the place, and chances are at some point those fish are going to eat those. So, and then you can also get into like, do you want something loud that you can track and be like, yeah, I'm going to catch fish on that. And then you do to get attention, or are you going to be thinking, no, the bite's going to be really subtle today. I'm going to match that bottom. You know, the Grand is generally brown bottom. It's that tea colored water. You've got like a brown algae, that limestone kind of thing. So it's all, it really does come down to what you're confident in. But next year I'll probably start with black and olive, and when that doesn't work, I'll go to something completely different. I have done well, and there's been a few sort of bites where I've done really well, like 3 fish in 10 minutes on yellow, all yellow, like yellow on yellow on yellow. And it just was one of those like perfect moments where that's what it was. But there's nothing bright yellow in the system. I don't know. It just was like bang, 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 and then it's done, and then you just go home. So that kind of thing can happen too. So, you know, if I had a small box of flies, I would be having some bright, loud colors, and then I would be having some match the bottom type colors. So now we have the head. We'll finish this fly off. I don't even know how we've been an hour and a half, Chris, just on this one fly. So we might have to do another episode. Anyway, the head is where we're going to get the other most, you know, the second best part about the fly is the buoyancy in the head. So I have here another RD brush in a 3-inch. This is a crafty brush. So it's just essentially craft fur with some flash. It's a great brush. Craft fur is relatively easy to throw in a loop, though. So craft fur is something that's way more readily available than a lot of the brushes on the market. So you could, at this stage to create this head, you could just throw a dubbing loop of craft fur, or if you wanted to, fox or whatever. I just like the synthetic here because we're gonna create a head covering with your UV resin. So I'm gonna tie that in. And again, I'm about a third of the way up the shank. And come to the front and pull this out to the sides. And I'm going to want to get about, you know, enough to create some bulk. And I'm just going to wrap it forward until I get right to the eye. And if you're into a shorter piece of this, you can use a hackle plier just to hold on to it. Makes it a lot better to manage. So I'm preening it back as I go. I want to make sure that it's just overlapping on itself, and I want to trap down the least amount of fibers as I can. And each turn, you know, I'm just pulling it back. Sometimes if it really gets trapped down on these things, midway through, I'll just pick it out with a bodkin or a needle or whatever, just to make sure I'm not really trapping stuff down that I won't be able to pick out after. And again, just collaring this back. There's 5. And again, that was only like a 3-inch piece. So out of a brush, you're going to get 2 12-inch brushes. So you could probably do 8 of these flies out of a brush. And because it's a brush, it's wire, it's not really going anywhere. And because it's synthetic, it's not going to break down. So this head this head is like bomb proof. So I want it right to the eye here, just because I do want to, you'll see how we create this head shape. And once I get right to the eye, that was about 6 turns of that. I'll usually take a bodkin just to pick out so I can wrap down and not trap a whole bunch of stuff there at the head. So I've just given it 1 turn in behind on that wire, and then I'll wrap in front, and that's going to lock it in. And I'll take the other scissors and trim that off. Okay. And then usually what I'll do is I'll take my thumbnail, and that wire can be sharp, and it can hit your line if you're fighting a fish. So when you trim it off, I just bend it back on itself and then tie it so it's staying out of the way. All right. So I'm just leaving that like that. And I'm going to, again, finish this fly off finish the head off by hitting it with some glue, some zap, and a quick whip finish, and that's going to be done. Okay, so if you wanted just like a marabou style of bait fish, you know, you could very easily fish this thing just as it is. You could put some eyes on it, or you could literally fish it like that. I'm big on eyes. So the whole, like, to create this swimming action, so I'm just picking out all of those fibers all around the hook. Okay. And I just want to make sure as I look at it that it's all standing out there. I want it all to stand out. Now I'm staring at it head on. I just want to make sure I've got material all around there. So it looks like a complete mess. So what I've got is just a small, you could use a piece of lead wire. And I've created kind of, I'm just using a piece of aluminum here. It's actually something that I'm trying to work on as an actual tool, but I call it, it's just going to create that shape so I can manage the head and set it. So I've kind of made just a piece of wire or aluminum or whatever in the shape of an oval. Okay, so I've got all that material pulled out and forward. So what I do is I sleeve that over the fly head. Okay, and that is now, everything is pulled back and out of the way, and that's going to create this, like, I don't know if you can see that, but it's a super flat top to bottom. It's perfectly shaped in a curved bait fish sort of head. So I pull all the way back, so now I can work with it. Okay, so that's what that brush at the front does, is it just creates the material that's allowing me to shape it. So pretty easy. I'm taking an oval shape, I'm sleeving it over. You could use lead wire, whatever, just get that hair pulled back. Okay, it's the rest of the fly that's sticking out that's going to do the dancing. And then I will take some eyeballs and glue them on. Had some eyeballs, there they are. So I got like a 4mm eye. Any, you know, you hear Alex Lafkas talk, and he'll never glue an eyeball on a fly to save his life because it's arts and crafts. I personally believe that eyeballs are key. I believe it's a hot spot. I believe it breaks up the head. I believe that if an eyeball fell off one of my flies, I'd probably glue it back on or switch up. I'm an eye guy. Through and through. I just think the contrast, it's a hot spot. It's a target point for fish. So I've just got whatever color you want. This is it's just a sort of a white and black or glow in a 4mm, but whatever size you want to. I like smaller eyes on this. It's just kind of the feel. It's just what I like. So anyway, I'm going to take some Zap gel or some Loctite gel. I'm going to turn this on its side. And the way I set these are pretty small eyes, so it's kind of,
sorry, Nick.
You want to make sure. Yeah.
Sorry, you froze on us again there. If you can just do that little refresh. Yes.
The moving?
Yep.
Okay. So you can take some Loctite gel from the hardware store, or I use Zap Zap gel. It's all kind of the same stuff, whatever you're comfortable with. And I'm going to put a small amount on here, just in the position about about a third of the shank back. That glue's a little bit messed up, so I'll grab my Loctite gel here. This is Loctite gel. You'll see that at most hardware stores. It's not cheap, but it's probably about the best stuff to glue eyes on. It's got a nice squeezed tube applicator that never goes wrong. So I'm about a third of the way back, and I'm just going to put a small amount on there. And because this is a synthetic, it really does bind to this. And then I'm going to take my eyeball that I pinched here. You could use a bodkin to set that on. And I'm just going to tap it in place and leave it alone. If you do that extra little time, you're going to try and tap that eye. It's going to stick to your hand, and then you're going to move it up to your mouth, and you're going to have an eyeball stuck to your lip. So I basically have I don't know if you can see that, Chris, but glued that on, and I like the look of it just being a little further back. So then once I've got it on the one side, I'll flip over. I'll kind of line up. So as I turn the vise over, I'm looking to where I set that eye on this side. I'll actually sometimes take my glue and turn it around, put it right on the middle of the shank. And I will then set that eye on. That's it. Don't touch it. It'll set. I then I want it to look nice and neat, but I also the flat profile really gives it a nice more push in the water, right? Like you could do this more round if you wanted, but however thin you make that wire to kind of press it in, it's going to give you even more of an erratic swim. Okay, so once those eyes are glued on, I've used I played around in the past with a product called Softex. Yep. It's finicky stuff. It is available. It's really cool. It's kind of like a clear coat that sets up like a flexible resin, basically, and it is great stuff to work with. It's super durable, but it stinks. It's got tourmaline in it, and in a 1969 basement like this, I'm generally not going to want to pull that out because it's a little bit scary on the fumes. It also the more it's exposed to air, this jar can thicken, and it's very tricky to thin it. So I mess around with it. I have used it a lot. It is a lot easier than using a hardware store silicone. But with this, I found that I'm using resin more and more because it's not penetrating through the whole head, so it's not going hard. I'm still getting that flexibility and trapping the air. It's just as durable. So what I'm doing here is I have Loon Thin, basically UV resin, and I've got a good UV light, and I'm just going to start at the eyes and work my way forward. So I'm going to just hit it with a few beads of this resin all the way around the fly, from the eye of the hook to the eye of the fly. And I'm just I don't want to use the brush applicator here because I want it to kind of settle in to the head before I sort of sculpt it. So again, a little goes a long way here. So I've kind of got it beaded all around. Okay, that's it. I will take either my finger if I had some paper towel, or I'll take a paintbrush, and I'm just going to smooth this out very gently. I'm just going to paint it back, and trust me, it seems like a lot of effort here, but it does create an incredible fly. So this kind of design. Think Bob Popovich's in some of his some of his stuff. With all that silicone head stuff. Gunnar Bramer does a lot of that. Jack Ford is kind of a relatively unknown in Ontario streamer kind of guru from Michigan. This is kind of where I was getting the idea for the silicone heads on trout streamers. So I've kind of got that bullet shape. Okay, and the thin loon I find is the perfect viscosity, and then I'm just going to hit that with the light.
There we go.
Froze? We good?
No. All good.
So the way this stuff cures, I've read a lot about UV resin. And if you hit it and then take it away, and then hit it, take it away, hit it, it somehow cures up a little bit differently. If you just keep burning it with that torch, it could sometimes kind of melt or even get more tacky. So I will always, as hitting this thing, I'll hit it and then kind of take it away. Okay. And basically that's done. So that's created this like super durable but flexible head. And when I was brushing the resin back, I was just hitting the eyes to keep them even more secure. So then I'll just take this off the whatever you've used to secure and kind of shape fly. And then but this pokeroo, which is dynamite. Again, my own pattern, and I've forgot the weight in the front hook, but that basically, gives you a really good taper. You got a perfect amount of marabou in there, and when you're on the strip, it definitely provides a really swimmy but slender baitfish pattern.
And that thing, right? even with the weight, that thing would not be all that heavy to cast, I imagine.
It's like nothing. I mean, the other thing about putting if you're putting weight, like if you think of Mark Sadati, who rather than big lead eyes on the front, Mark Sadati tied like the Sadati Slammer and a lot of his platforms for saltwater, like surf fishing and whatever, and trout. Most of his weight is on the underside of the shank on the front. So he's using lead strips and just piling them up on the bottom. This, having the weight in the midsection, like right at the back of the front hook, it hides the weight from your cast almost. So if I was fishing that same tungsten, that same weight of the tungsten in a lead eye right on the front, it'd be a lot clunkier to cast, believe it or not, than having that weight in the back or having the weight in the midsection of the fly. The counteraction here, and another thing, if you think about Matt G's flies, his musky flies, most of like his yard sails and slip and slides and everything, he's putting a rattle before he even starts the back hook. He's putting a giant rattle out the back. Not so much for the sound, for the weight, and he's putting it on the top. So if you think about that weight on a musky fly, like a yard sail, he's got this rattle out the back on the top on an articulated fly. So it's the similar sort of thing that I'm doing with the weight on that hinge on the front hook. Every time you strip his flies, that rattle makes the back want to turn, and it sort of turns on its side. Then you strip and it comes true. And then that it's that jackknifing motion, so that when you finish your strip, the fly doesn't just sit there. It actually crumples and turns over. It's injured. It's cool. So this is kind of the same thing. You got the head fights with the back. The marabou makes it nice and pulsating and swimmy. That translucy brush works really well on this fly, and it's just super durable. It works for everything. So
that's very cool.
That's the pokeroo.
Very, very nice. So I don't know what you're thinking. If you want to do the other, I don't know how long you think it's going to take you. You know the fly better than.
Well, I think I don't know, Chris. Like, I'd be happy to jump on and do a separate segment on another fly. This one, the thing about this next one that we were going to do is it's several shanks.
Yeah.
So it's so sort of a game changer kind of platform. Like, I could spin through it really quick if you want to and just not talk my way through it too much. I'll just say what I'm putting on if you wanted to try and crank it out, or we can maybe set up another time.
Yeah. Up to you. I mean, I don't know how everyone else feels about this, but I feel like I'd love to hear a little bit more in depth, when you have the time on that fly count, what your thought process is and everything, just like we did on this one.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we'll have you back a little bit later. I think we've got all of our dates filled for February at this point, but looking into March, maybe we can get you back here.
Yeah, well, streamer season is the first part of the year to get back at it. So yeah, any opportunity. I love doing this. I usually, as you know, Chris, we usually talk my way right out of an hour and a half like it's nothing. But again, just this fly really, That's just mine. I mean, you can take that weight system, you could take that that head profile, creative, like turn that into a sculpin. What would you do to make that head create the same action but a sculpin profile? I mean, mash up another back end design, go with something that's maybe bucktail and get even more of that surface kind of fighting, the buoyancy versus the weight. It's just kind of those techniques that are nothing new, but that kind of shaped head with the resin is just, it should get you, you know, if you're into tying your own stuff or kind of coming up with your own patterns, it's just a way to have one more head design, like, you know, other than a deer hair spun head or a wool head, or just wrapping a bunch of brush up there. Like, just that extra element really gives the fly a lot more action. So yeah, that thing could be changed up just about any way you want it. I've tied them up into like a 7-8 inch that has had some really great mornings on the White River for trout. Done them with ostrich, done them with different brushes. You know, you don't have to use craft fur if you wanted something more dense or coarse. You know, you could go with like a synthetic. You could throw EP fiber into a brush, and it's kind of this going to give you the same thing once you shape and sculpt that head with the UV or the soft tax.
Yeah.
So yeah,
great platform. Yeah, lots of potential opportunities there, and like I say, for multiple species too. So that's very cool. Yeah, I got to play around with that.
So yeah, well, maybe we will have some time to set this up again. I apologize for over talking, but I think
hey, don't apologize.
You guys got all my secrets now, so you know who I am. You basically know where I am and what I'm going to be doing.
We'll just skip all that next time. Just start with you tying.
But yeah, anyone, you know, if anyone's got any questions, I'm on Instagram. That's usually where I keep my fishing activity. And if you are talking to Chris or Rob and wanted any advice on equipment, materials, you know, I'm always here. So, you know, I always love to support local and love these guys and what they're doing in Toronto. And yeah, anything you got, throw it at me. I'll be able to help you out too. So I know that you guys are all experts in there, but there could be some random question that some streamer nerd wants to know, and I might be able to help you out. So feel free to reach out. And yeah, if I hope to see everyone again on this live feed, and if not, I hope to see everyone on the river in a couple months, distanced with masks.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks for being so generous as always with your tips and your time. And for everyone watching, yeah, we'll definitely try and get Nick back. I don't think that's a maybe. I think as long as he has the time, we'll try and do it.
Sure.
And then coming up, we've got a few more talks if anyone's interested. So Saturday, Rob Sesta is actually going to be doing a talk on poppers for bass and some simple to tie poppers too. So if anyone's ever been interested in that, we have that coming up. Next Thursday, we have Ian Trout coming back for his third and final session on CDC. And then a few more after that as well, looking all the way into March and continuing beyond that. So in the meantime, if anyone needs materials, advice, you know where to find us. Otherwise, we'll see you then. Hope everyone has a good night. Thanks again, Nick. Talk soon.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you. We'll see you later.